It happened in the middle of what should have been a routine post-game media session. Sophie Cunningham had just finished another gritty performance, diving for loose balls, hounding opponents on defense, and knocking down shots when her team needed them most. She walked into the interview room still flushed from the game, water bottle in hand, ready to answer the usual mix of softball questions about strategy and execution. Then it happened. A reporter, without any build-up, looked her straight in the eye and said something that froze the room. "Sophie, you're not just playing the WNBA. You're redefining what it means to be a leader in women's basketball." The words hit differently. It wasn't about stats or matchups or the scoreboard. It was about her impact. And for once, Sophie, the quick-talking, always ready with a comeback Sophie Cunningham, was speechless. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. That pause in her answer spoke volumes. Because when you strip away the game highlights and fiery on-court moments, Sophie's career has been anything but a smooth ride. From the outside, people see a confident, fearless player who seems built for the spotlight. But the reality is that her journey has been lined with obstacles, injuries that sidelined her, critics who doubted her, and moments where the pressure could have broken someone with less resolve. Back in Columbia, Missouri, she was a hometown phenom. She dominated in high school, her name echoing through gyms long before she could even drive herself to practice. By the time she committed to the Missouri Tigers, expectations were sky high, and she met them, and then some, becoming one of the most recognizable faces in college basketball. But the higher you climb, the harder the pushback. The shift from college star to professional player is brutal. The WNBA is a league where every roster spot is earned daily, not given. Sophie came in with the same determination she had since her teenage years, but the learning curve was steep. She wasn't the tallest or the fastest, so she had to double down on the things that made her dangerous: relentless hustle, smart positioning, and a refusal to be intimidated. And that's where the injuries came. There were games she had to watch from the bench, wrapped in ice, her competitive fire raging while her body told her to wait. There were whispers that maybe she'd peaked too early, that maybe her style of play wouldn't translate long-term in a league full of athletic freaks and seasoned veterans. Sophie heard all of it, and instead of letting it bury her, she turned it into fuel. That's the thing about Cunningham. She's built for adversity. Every time someone's tried to write her off, she's come back sharper, stronger, and more fearless than before. That's why fans connect with her so deeply. She doesn't just play the game. She plays it like every possession is a personal challenge to prove she belongs. And she does belong. Not just because of the points she scores, but because of the energy she brings every time she steps on the court. She could be the spark that flips the momentum of a game in a single play, a steal, a contested rebound, a three-pointer with a defender's hand in her face. She's a player who gets in the mix when tensions rise, who claps in the opponent's face after a big stop, who hypes up the crowd when the team needs a lift. Those are intangibles you can't measure, but they change games. The reporter's words after that game weren't just flattery. They were recognition of the bigger picture, that Sophie's leadership doesn't just happen in the locker room or during huddles. It happens every second she's on the floor, showing younger players that heart and hustle can be just as dangerous as raw athleticism. It's in the way she bounces back from a rough shooting night by locking down on defense the next game. It's in the way she refuses to disappear when the game gets physical. It's in the way she talks openly about the grind, the setbacks, and the mental side of competition. That's part of why her influence extends far beyond the WNBA court. Sophie has become a media presence. Whether it's through her podcast, interviews, or viral social media moments, she's one of the league's most recognizable personalities. She's unapologetically herself. And in a sports culture that often pressures women to be overly polished, that authenticity stands out. She doesn't dodge tough questions. She doesn't soften her opinions to avoid criticism. And while that can make her polarizing, it's also what makes her magnetic. Fans know they're getting the real Sophie, not a PR-crafted version. That attitude is especially important for the next generation of players watching her. She's showing them that there's more than one way to lead. You don't have to be quiet to be respected. You don't have to hide your emotions to be taken seriously. You can be both a fierce competitor and a fully human personality. When she finally answered the reporter, her voice was quieter than usual, but the words carried weight. "I've had to fight for everything in this league," she said. "If that shows other players that they can do the same, then yeah, that's leadership to me." It wasn't a rehearsed line. It was the truth, and it landed with the kind of sincerity you can't fake. Her story is still being written. Sophie Cunningham isn't done, not even close. She's still chasing wins, still refining her game, still finding new ways to push herself. But she's also building something lasting. Every viral clip, every clutch performance, every heated exchange on the court is adding to a legacy that's not about perfection, but about persistence. That's why, years from now, when young players are asked to inspire them to push through the grind, Sophie's name is going to come up again and again, because she didn't just play the game, she played it her way, and she never let anyone take that from her. And maybe that's why that reporter's comment caught her off guard, because in the middle of the chaos of a WNBA season, in the constant push to get better, it's easy to forget that you've already become what you once dreamed of being. For Sophie Cunningham, that moment in front of the microphones wasn't just another post-game interview. It was a reminder that her fight, her fire, and her fearlessness are shaping the future of the game and inspiring players she hasn't even met yet. When Sophie Cunningham walked out of that press room, the echo of that one sentence from the reporter didn't fade. For someone as competitive and forward-focused as Sophie, it's rare to stop and take stock of what's already been accomplished. She's built her entire career on what's next. The next game, the next matchup, the next challenge to silence the critics. But in the hallway afterward, away from the cameras and the crowd, that moment lingered. It wasn't because she'd never heard praise before. Sophie's been celebrated since she was a teenager for her skill, her energy, and her charisma. But this was different. This wasn't someone applauding her stats. This was someone pointing out that she had become the example of leadership in women's basketball. Not because of a championship trophy or a scoring title, but because of how she carried herself through every high and low. And if you followed Sophie's career, you know the lows were just as defining as the highs. The thing that separates Sophie from a lot of players is that her story isn't a neat, linear climb. For every viral highlight, there's been a setback. For every game-winning shot, there's been an injury that forced her to the sideline. And in those moments, the easy choice would have been to fade into the background, to let the hype pass her by. But Sophie's wired differently. She treats every obstacle like a dare, a challenge to prove she's not just going to survive it, but come out stronger. Back in her Missouri Tigers days, she had games where she played through pain most people wouldn't even practice with. She's been the target of physical play from opponents who tried to rattle her, from defenders who wanted to test her toughness. And every time, she's met it head-on, sometimes literally, with a stare-down or a few choice words that made fans leap out of their seats. That's why her reputation in the WNBA is more than just a good player. She's a presence. When she steps onto the floor, the energy changes. Her teammates feed off her fire. Opponents brace for a long night. Fans in the arena lean forward because they know something's about to happen. And it's not just her scoring or her defense. It's the way she plays with the emotional volume cranked all the way up. Every rebound matters. Every possession is personal. She's a player who gets a bench on its feet after a hustle play, who pulls teammates into huddles mid-play, who talks to refs not just to plead a case, but to set the tone. That's why the reporter's comment about redefining leadership landed so hard. Because in a league that's often focused on star scorers and highlight reels, Sophie's building her legacy on something less flashy, but more enduring. The ability to inspire everyone around her to give more than they thought they could. And that influence doesn't stop at the arena doors. Sophie has become a fixture in the media space, and not by accident. She's smart enough to know that visibility matters, that if you want to grow the game, you have to give people a reason to care about the players. Whether it's her candid podcast appearances, her open and sometimes fiery social media presence, or her community outreach, Sophie has turned herself into more than just a name on the roster. Her authenticity is her superpower. She doesn't hide the hard parts. The rehab days, the frustration after a loss, the nerves before a big game. And that transparency makes her relatable in a way that stats never could. Young players see her and think, She's just like me, and if she can do it, maybe I can too. That's why the speechless moment wasn't about being surprised by the compliment. It was about realizing how far that authenticity had carried her. Years of showing up, even when it was hard. Years of refusing to shrink under pressure. Years of making sure that the way she played matched the way she talked. The other thing about Sophie is that she's not afraid to take on the role of the villain if that's what the moment calls for. She knows not everyone in the league is going to like her. She's okay with that. Because leadership isn't about being universally loved. It's about earning respect, and sometimes the quickest route to respect is showing you won't be pushed around. In the days after that press conference, the clip of the exchange made the rounds online. Fans were sharing their favorite Sophie moments. The game where she hit a dagger three and stared down the opposing bench. The time she picked up a technical foul for standing up for a teammate. The post-game interviews where she spoke her mind even when it wasn't a safe answer. It was like the comment had cracked open a conversation people were already ready to have. Sophie Cunningham isn't just in the WNBA. She's shaping it, and shaping it in a way that doesn't rely on traditional superstar treatment. She's not a player whose name is built on being a first overall draft pick or the top scorer in the league. She's built it on intangibles, the kind that don't show up on a box score, but absolutely decide games. If you want proof, ask her teammates. Over and over, they'll tell you the same thing. Sophie's the one who sets the tone in practice. She's the one who checks in after a rough game. She's the one who makes sure the locker room energy stays locked in, even in the middle of a losing streak. That's leadership, and it's not the kind that goes away when the cameras stop rolling. Sophie's also well aware that the WNBA is at a turning point. Players like Caitlin Clark are drawing unprecedented attention to the league, and with that attention comes opportunity and pressure. Sophie's not just trying to elevate herself. She's trying to make sure the league as a whole takes advantage of this moment. That's why she's vocal about issues like players' safety, officiating standards, and media coverage. She knows that if the league doesn't grow its infrastructure and protect its players now, this wave of momentum could disappear as quickly as it came. She's also aware that the next generation is watching. In her mind, every game is a chance to show young players, especially young women, that toughness, resilience, and confidence are not optional in professional sports. They're essential. Maybe that's why the reporter's words felt so heavy. Because deep down, Sophie knows she's been building toward this role for years. And to have someone acknowledge it, in a room full of peers, media, and fans, was like seeing the blueprint she's been following finally recognized as a real thing. She didn't need the compliment to keep going. That's not how she operates. But there's something about hearing it out loud, about knowing that the grit and the grind aren't just noticed but valued, that can give even the toughest competitor a pause. As the season rolls on, that moment will probably fade in the public's mind. But for Sophie Cunningham, it's going to stick. Not because it was the most dramatic thing that's ever happened to her, but because it was the clearest reminder yet that she's already become what she set out to be, a leader whose impact stretches far beyond her own stat line. And if you know anything about Sophie, you know that's just the beginning. The same way she's fought for every inch of her career so far, she'll keep fighting. For her team, for the league, for the next wave of players who will take the court knowing there's more than one way to lead. Because in her world, leadership isn't about waiting to be given the title. It's about showing up game after game and proving you've earned it. And by that measure, Sophie Cunningham has been a leader for years. It just took one unexpected question to make everyone else see it too. For Sophie Cunningham, the flight home that night was unusually quiet. Normally, she'd be rewatching clips from a game, scrolling through messages, or debating plays with teammates. But this time, she found herself staring out the window, thinking about that one sentence from a reporter. You're redefining what it means to be a leader in women's basketball. It wasn't that she hadn't heard compliments before. She had. Praise is part of the job when you play at the professional level. But it's one thing to be told you played well or that you're a fan favorite. It's something else entirely to have your impact defined in front of the world. It made her realize that maybe, without even fully noticing, she had crossed over from chasing respect to actually shaping the culture of the league. That realization hit her in layers. She thought about her high school years in Columbia, Missouri, when she was a big fish in the small pond. She remembered her college career at Missouri, When the crowds got bigger, the stakes got higher, and she started to feel the pressure of carrying a program. Back then, leadership meant scoring points, making plays, and pushing herself past exhaustion to keep her team in the game. But the WNBA had taught her that leadership was more complex. It wasn't just about what you did in crunch time. It was about what you did every time. Every practice rep, every defensive possession, every interaction with a teammate who was struggling. Leadership in the pros meant consistency, even on nights when your own stat line wasn't pretty. Sophie's path to that understanding wasn't smooth. Her rookie season was a wake-up call. She came in with a reputation, but reputations don't earn you minutes in the WNBA. You earn those by doing the little things the coaching staff notices: fighting over screens, taking charges, moving without the ball. She learned quickly that she couldn't just be good at the pro level. She had to be relentless. The setbacks came, too. There were injuries that kept her in street clothes, long rehab sessions where she had to relearn patience. There were shooting slumps that tested her confidence. There were games where her body felt heavy and her mind even heavier, but she had to show up with the same energy anyway. Those are the parts fans don't see. The moments where leadership means dragging yourself into the gym at 7 a.m., not because you feel like it, but because that's what the job demands. Over time, Sophie realized her greatest strength wasn't just her skill set. It was her mentality. The same stubbornness that made her a fierce competitor in college became the foundation of her professional identity. She wasn't afraid of physical play. She wasn't afraid of confrontation. And she sure wasn't afraid of speaking her mind. That edge made her polarizing at times. Some opponents hated playing against her. Some commentators didn't like her candor. But it also made her magnetic to fans who were tired of scripted interviews and safe personalities. Sophie wasn't pretending to be anything she wasn't. And that authenticity, the very thing that earned her both love and criticism, started to turn her into more than just a player. She became a symbol for a certain kind of competitor. Fearless, unapologetic, and unwilling to fade into the background. That's why the reporter's statement landed like it did. It wasn't just recognizing Sophie for her performance. It was recognizing the way she had gone about building her career, not as a flashiest scorer, not as a player protected by hype, but as someone who carved out her space by sheer will. She thought about the younger players coming into the league now, the rookies with wide eyes and the weight of expectations. Many of them didn't know what it was like to fight for a roster spot, to walk into training camp, knowing you had to prove you belonged every single day. If her presence, her energy, her story could make their road a little clearer, maybe that was a real legacy she was building. The more she sat with it, the more she realized that redefining leadership wasn't about replacing what came before. It was about expanding it. In a league where leadership had often been measured in points per game and all-star selections, she was showing that it could also be measured in hustle stats, in locker room culture, and how hard you made your team work in practice. Leadership could be a dive across the floor to save a loose ball. It could be pulling a teammate aside after a blown coverage instead of calling them out in front of the team. It could be standing in front of a microphone and defending your squad, even if it meant drawing criticism from the league office. That's the part Sophie knew she could control, the example she set every time she stepped on the court or into a room full of cameras. The next game after the interview, she noticed something different when she walked into shoot-around. Younger players were watching her more closely. In huddles, they listened with sharper attention. Even veterans, the ones she'd gone toe-to-toe with in practices, seemed to nod a little more when she spoke. That's the unspoken truth about leadership. Once it's recognized, it changes the way people see you, not because your behavior has changed, but because they start to connect the dots between your actions and the team's identity. And in Sophie's case, that identity was toughness, effort, refusing to back down. She also knew that with recognition came responsibility. The WNBA is still in a fragile growth stage, and she's fully aware of the platform she has. Every interview, every soundbite, every viral clip adds to the public's perception of the league. Being herself had gotten her this far, but she also had to balance that fire with intention, knowing when to push, when to encourage, and when to let her game do the talking. For Sophie, it was never about playing a part. It was about being the same person in every setting, whether she was battling for a rebound or talking to a kid at a community clinic. That consistency was the core of her leadership style, and it's what kept her grounded when the noise, good or bad, got loud. By the end of that week, the moment in the press room had already turned into a small legend among fans. Clips circulated on social media, captured with phrases like real recognize real and leader energy. People shared their own stories of meeting Sophie, at games, at charity events, even in grocery stores, and how she treated them like they mattered. That was the other side of redefining leadership, making people feel seen. It wasn't just about her teammates or the media. It was about the fans who invested their time and money into the league, the kids who wore her jersey to school, the parents who brought their daughters to games hoping they'd catch a glimpse of what hard work and confidence look like in person. Sophie knew she'd still have nights where the shots didn't fall, where the scoreboard didn't tilt her way. But that didn't scare her, because leadership, as she'd learned, is built in those moments just as much as in the wins. It's in showing up, ready to compete, no matter what the circumstances are. It's in proving that one bad quarter doesn't define you or your season. It's in refusing to let the setbacks shrink your ambition. And as she thought about it, she realized that maybe this was the real reason she had been speechless in that press room. Because the compliment wasn't about something she had done. It was about something she had become.